Thank you. I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Palo Alto City Council, November 12th at 5:01 p.m. Sorry for the dog whining in the background. Could we please take the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Cormack?
Here.
Vice Mayor Du Bois? Councilmember Filseth? Mayor Fine?
Here.
Councilmember Nis?
Here.
Councilmember Ku? Councilmember Tanaka?
Here.
4 present.
Thank you so much. So we have one special order of the day, interviews for candidates for the Architectural Review Board and Parks and Recreation Commission. Let's please get started with that. I believe our first interviewee is Jeffrey Nichols, to be followed by Andy Reid.
Correct. I have promoted Jeffrey to panelist. So if you can turn on your camera and unmute yourself, Jeffrey, we will be able to start the interview.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
We can. How are you?
Good. I'm well, thank you. I'm glad the technology worked first try.
Awesome. I know we have trouble a lot. Anyways, welcome, Mr. Nichols. I'm Adrian Fine, here with my colleagues on the City Council. Thank you so much for applying for the Parks and Recreation Commission, one of our awesome boards and commissions in Palo Alto. Want to start things off by giving you a moment or two to share a little bit about yourself and your interest in the commission. And then we'll turn over to council for some questions and then give you a minute or so to wrap up. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, and thank you for this interview. I appreciate the chance to work with the city on this. I've been in Palo Alto since 1991 and raised my kids here, but they're grown up now and I'm looking to do a little more. I'm a software engineer by trade. Have enjoyed Silicon Valley and the startups that I've been in, and there have been a few. But I also have a 30-year history of working as a volunteer, often as a treasurer, and I'm hoping to bring that experience to this commission. I was a founding member of Bay Area Action in 1990. I've been with Actera for 20 years. I've worked on city measure campaigns. I've been a volunteer at the Aloni Elementary School Farm. I've been a board member of Little League. I am a block preparedness coordinator and an AYSO soccer referee. I have connections with the environmental community and the youth sports community. And I feel very strongly about sports. I believe that all kids should have the opportunity to play. I required my kids to have a sport, although I didn't care what level, they just have to have one. And my time with the Little League and the soccer has proven that out. I have been learning a lot about parks in Palo Alto, more than I ever knew there was, as I'm coming to this kind of new. I have a list of the parks from the plan, and there are at least 10 I never even knew existed. So I'm looking forward to learning more. I think because of my history with ecology and sports and the fact that I'm a dog owner, I have a lot of perspectives on how to use parks and how recreation fits into all this. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And being a volunteer on the Aloni farm, that warms my heart as an Aloni kid. So, for sure. I'll kick it off with one quick question. Actera, wonderfully respected, policy and service organization in Palo Alto. If you were to, kind of step out of your role working with them and just think about like the environmental community, if they could have like one, pie in the sky wish for Palo Alto Parks, what would that look like from the environmental community, do you think?
Well, that's a good question. I think Actera is very, very involved in education. And so I see a lot of movement now in making the parks much more environmentally friendly with the stormwater initiative and other native plants and such. Also the education that goes along with them. I think that Palo Alto is moving in a great direction. I think Actera wants to expand that to more than just Palo Alto. And I'd like to see Palo Alto as an example moving forward of how a whole community can get involved in environmental issues. Recently, Actera is focused on climate change, and I see a lot of that happening in Palo Alto with the climate plan and stormwater and other things.
Nice, thank you. Councilmember Nis.
Thank you for applying. Of course, we appreciate that. A question I ask almost anyone who wants to serve on this is, even though you said there are lots of local parks you like, what is your favorite park and why?
That's okay. Well, my kids, they started playing soccer early, and my wife is a peacemaker, and she volunteered to be the referee and found herself completely underwater. So not her personality at all. So I started doing that, and I have been doing that to this day, even though my kids are in their 20s now. And I now referee all levels, all the way up through college and adult. So I'd have to say that my favorite parts are the ones that have the soccer fields. So the Mayfield, I see a lot of. I'm there all the time. El Camino Park, of course. Because those three have the lights, it's those I see more often than any of the others. But my local park is Hoover, and I've seen some incredible things go by there. The recent adding of the bathrooms, it's got a nice dog run, and the tennis courts and handball stuff that's there, plus the Little League field. That stuff, excuse me a second. That phone call can't be that important. I just see so many uses of that park, and we go there regularly. So I'd have to say Hoover.
Great, thank you for that answer.
Thank you. Councilmember Cormack.
Good evening, Mr. Nichols. Thanks so much for applying. It appears that not all of the council members were able to attend this meeting. I just want to assure you that the video will be made available so that they'll have an opportunity to hear from you. So this is my new question as of the last go round. What are 2 words that people who have worked with you would use to describe you? So it could be, you know, people in your personal life, professional life, volunteer life. What are 2 words that people would use to describe you?
You know, I was actually talking to Peter Dreckmeyer about that recently. He's an old friend of mine, obviously one of the founders of Bay Area Action, so I've known him all this time. And he used 2 words to mention me, and he thought I was a critical thinker and I was very thoughtful. Now, I come from a tech background. I have a degree in mathematics, so I do kind of look at the numbers a lot, and I come at things very logically. I also care a lot about sort of finding wins for everybody. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thanks so much. And since there's only 4 of us, I'll if the mayor, if we have more time, I'll come back.
Of course. No, if you want to follow on.
Okay.
Sure.
So then the other question I have is, do you have any thoughts on how we can fund our lovely and ambitious parks master plan?
Well, I certainly, with this age of COVID, with less revenues, it's going to be harder. I was reading some of the notes from the Parks Committee on development, and yeah, reaching out to alternative sources is always difficult. Having been around fundraising for Actera for a long time, it takes a special knowledge to be able to expand your fundraising and development efforts. So I think we're going to have to go that way. I'm not that person, but I can help, but I'm not the guy to organize all that. And I think we need somebody who's really good at that to make sure that those kinds of funds become available from a variety of sources, certainly foundations and such, and neighbors. One of the, back in the mid 90s, I did have a chance to sort of see some of that in action. I was one of 4 people at Bay Area Action that got involved in the Pearson Arastadero project. The city had the property there and a house on there, a model home from the original purchase, and finally allocated $90,000 to demolish the house. And through a series of actions, it was actually quite interesting, where perhaps we don't have time for all the details, but we got an RFP from the city to provide an alternative, and the 4 of us came back with a proposal with incredible depth and width of things we could do with the preserve, including a caretaker in the model home and so forth. Unfortunately, we didn't quite stick to the RFP, and so the city, as much as they liked it, couldn't really do that. And so they agreed to write another RFP, at which point the neighbors of the Rastero Preserve, some of the more wealthy ones, got involved and set up a $500,000 fund, as long as we made some nice compromises with them, which we did. And that's how the modest gateway facility on Arrestadero Road got built. So yes, there's always more money available, but it's not always hard, not always easy to find.
How well I know. Thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing that. Councilmember Tanaka, I see your hand, and then we'll ask you, Mr. Nichols, to please wrap it up.
Thank you for applying. Really appreciate your interest in the city. Recently there's been a petition going around for enhancing our skate park at Greer. There's almost 2,000 signatures, and I think a good portion of them are Palo Alto residents. What do you think the city should do in that regards? How should we handle this, and what should the Parks and Recs Commission do about this?
Well, that's really interesting because last I heard it was about 600 signatures. So it sounds like it's gathering some steam here.
I think there's 600 or 700 Palo Alto signatures, and then there's a bunch of regional ones.
Interesting. So I went back and I actually watched that August meeting, and I heard the people make their case for it. And it's interesting. I remember bumper stickers from many years ago saying skateboarding is not a crime. And I was reminded of that as I was listening to this. I think there was at some point the feeling that it was, I don't know, the English term would be hooligans and such, but it's pretty clear that's not the case. And the people who were there made very strong cases that it's as good a sport as any and involves youth in, social skills and physical skills. So I'm a great fan of anything that brings sports to kids. And this, if there's that many people who want it, I'd like to find a way to get that to happen. Obviously in Palo Alto, the space is dear, and there are, 50 different demands on all the parks. So I don't think I have a specific answer to that, but I think I would push hard to try and find a way to do that. I think some of the concerns that were mentioned were that there's a homeless community and there were broken bottles, some when mentioned, and I think we need to figure out how to address that. Also, that in Sunnyvale, there's a park that has lights that stay open until 10. So there are some examples around the region that might be able to help us. But again, finding the right park to do that will be part of the issue, and it'll take a little more investigation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Nichols. Want to give you a minute or so to wrap up. I know these are quick, fast interviews, but again, we all appreciate you applying and your interest.
Well, thank you. No, I don't have a whole lot to add. I think we've had a chance to bring up some of the things I care the most about. I'm really kind of excited about this. I've sort of been around the city and done a little bit of stuff here and there over the years, and I'm going to have a little more free time on my hands now. The kids are, well, supposedly away, but no. Is there something happening? No. So I'm looking for something more to do and do some more volunteer work. This feels like a great possibility for me. Yeah, I think it'd be very exciting. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you so much. And thank you for your diversity of service to Palo Alto already. But thank you for applying. Thanks. All right. If we can please go to our next interviewee, Andy Reid.
Yes, of course. Let's see, Andy Reid, I'm going to promote you to panelist. You'll have to have your video turned on and your mic on, and then your interview will begin.
Yay, it worked. All right. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for applying. Andy, I'm Adrian, and I'm here with my colleagues. Thank you very much for your interest in the Parks and Recreation Commission and for applying. Wanted to give you a moment or two to talk about yourself, tell about your interest in this commission, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues for their questions, and we'll leave a minute or so for you to wrap up.
That sounds great. I'm Andy Reid, and I was lucky enough to get to choose to live in Palo Alto when my husband and I retired a few years ago. He grew up here and has owned a rental property since the 80s, so we have spent plenty of time here and are really glad to be back for good. One great way to meet neighbors is to get involved with a neighborhood group, which I did, and which has drawn me to many council and commissions and board meetings over the years, learning how the city runs and how volunteers are essential to a successful civic partnership. Being a runner and a hiker and a swimmer, I take advantage of all these offerings that Palo Alto has. I attended a PRC meeting regarding an issue I was involved in, pickleball, and I was very impressed at how that was handled. And watching the recent meetings, I'm impressed with the good work done on Foothills Park, even though things have since changed. My experience includes building a dog park in Grass Valley, where I lived in 2011. And that little town had no Parks and Rec department, much less a commission. So we not only, tapped the funds to build it, but then had to put together the volunteer organization to staff it. So that was an experience that was fun. Most recently, I've participated in a working group for Mid-Penn Regional Open Space District to come to consensus with many members of varying sides of the issue on opening up to public access La Honda Creek Preserve, which I found to be a fascinating exercise in civic duty. I'm here because I'm interested in helping keep Palo Alto's parks and open spaces vibrant, safe, and friendly. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I want to turn it over to my colleagues. Please just hit your hand if you have any questions. Councilmember Nis.
I ask others this question. You clearly love our outdoors. You like our pool or so forth. What is your favorite park?
I cheated because I watched the other one, so I'm ready. I would have to say Arrastradero. And then, I like to go all the way through and then come through and do Foothill and then come back around. So depending on how much time, if I have 2 hours or if I have 4, I just love that area up there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cormack.
Ms. Reid, hello, it's nice to see you.
Thank you.
I always have this question now. What are 2 words that people who have worked with you in either your professional or personal or community volunteer life, what 2 words would they use to describe you and how you work?
Yeah, I would have to say relentless. When it came to building this dog park in Grass Valley, there was no manual. I had no idea. So I started from the ground up and made it up as I went along. And of course I had helpers, part of the organization, Dogs Run Free of Nevada County. We all kind of just got together and put our heads together to figure out how to do it. But it was pounding doors and going to talk to the city and figuring out what possibilities there were. So I would say relentless. And then I would have to say, I shared office space with other women CPAs for years and years in San Francisco. And when there came a situation that had to be handled, I was called the nice one. So I had to be put in front of whoever was pounding on the door or whoever wanted to take our time. So I would say those 2 things, relentless and the nice one.
Sometime I'll tell you a story about relentless and when I left the Palo Library Foundation Board. And then the other quick question is, do you have any thoughts on how to fund the Parks Master Plan, which is a lovely, ambitious document?
It is wonderful. You're talking about that 2017 document. That's fascinating. I really love the maps, and being able to see how many citizens actually don't have a park within a quarter mile or half mile was fascinating. I would really love to see us have more open spaces and have them more equally spread throughout the city. But that's a big one. That's a really big issue. And I'm an accountant. I haven't looked at the financial side of all of this. My experience has been, getting raising funds on a very small level. So I'm not a pro in this department, but I do think we have plenty of large companies and very philanthropic members of our community. If the proper business plan was put together, and we certainly have a wonderful plan already, as you were referencing, it would be a matter of tapping some of those folks, would be my guess.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Snaka.
You heard the question I asked the last person, but I'm going to ask you slightly different because you have experience in actually making a park happen. So how would you overcome the objections that would come in trying to enhance Greer to have a more beginner-friendly skate park? What do you think? How would you go about that process, given your experience?
Yeah, I've been to Greer Park and I've checked it out. And I also would throw in that dog park is quite dated and really could stand an upgrade and made larger. But I'm really impressed with the folks that are doing this, the push for skateboard park. And I think, you know, it's getting the neighbors involved is huge. So if there's folks that are close enough to the skateboard park that are concerned, or I would have to identify what the opposition to it is, and I'm not familiar with that. But I know when I did the dog park, I went around to the neighborhoods around the park where we had our sights on, because there were fears and I had to know what they were so that I could address them. So has there been a poll done? I don't know as to what the opposition is. But I think skateboard parks and all of these kids that are coming to city council meetings and PRC meetings and putting forth great arguments for a skateboard park. I think we definitely could either do another huge one. Greer Park being the biggest park would seem like the logical place to put it.
Thank you very much. Just one last question and then want to leave you a minute to wrap up. I think there's a bit of a split on council about whether our commissions and boards should be doing ad hoc committees, kind of self-initiated work on projects. And the Parks and Recreation Commission has actually done a fair bit of those, a number of ad hoc committees on a range of subjects, including Foothill. What are your thoughts on that? How would you decide whether your commission should do an ad hoc or not?
And by that, you mean a subcommittee in charge?
Yeah, a subcommittee looking at a new issue.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a great idea. I think, you would probably choose to split the groups up according to their skills or expertise, because it would seem to me that you could put together a plan more easily with fewer people and make your case and then bring it to the larger body. So that makes good sense to me. Foothill, I find amazing what work they did putting together the panel of experts when they were talking about that. And there's that new piece there now too, 7.5 acres or something. But I mean, I think ad hoc groups is an excellent way to utilize everybody's best skills. And also, having one meeting a month is not a lot of time. So if you're willing to put in the work, and I'm one of those, I think it's a great idea.
Nice. Thank you so much. I want to leave you just 1 minute to kind of wrap up. I know these are short and sweet interviews, but again, we truly appreciate your interest in your application.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it. I would just say that parks, trails, and open space and recreation are essential community services that help determine the well-being of a community. And as good stewards of our natural environment, thoughtful planning and care has to be taken to preserve and maintain parks and open space. Also, we have to be flexible. And I think one of the main goals and purposes of the commission is to gather information from residents and to get a consensus of seeing if there's residents that are concerned about any of the issues and bring them into the conversation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ms. Reid. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. If we could please go to our next interviewee, Mr. Smolar.
Yes. So, Mr. Smolar, I'm going to promote you to panelist. You will have to have your video and your audio turned on, and then the interview will start.
Welcome, Mr. Smolar. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm sorry if I look huge. That's not what I'm trying to do right there.
It's okay. It's the age of Zoom. So first of all, thank you so much for your application and your interest in the commission. We really appreciate it. I wanted to start off by giving you a moment or two to describe your interest in the Parks and Recreation Commission, a little bit about yourself, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues for a few questions, and we'll be sure to leave you a minute or so to wrap up. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mayor Fine. I really appreciate it. My name is Curtis Smoller. I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for about 23 years. I was a father at the, I was a father. I still am a father, but I was on the board of the Little League, of the Palo Alto Little League for about 4 or 5 years. During which time we dealt with a lot of issues relating to the Parks and Recs in the city, and including issues that would cross over from Parks and Recs in the city to private residents. For example, the telecom situation. I don't know if you're familiar with the antenna on top of the the foul pole. We were dealing with dogs. We dealt with families. We dealt with basically anything you could think of. We also were very involved in raising money and getting the stakeholders in Palo Alto Little League to get involved and give money for the projects that we were doing. Palo Alto Little League, as you know, is funded by the people who play Little League, but there's also other things that are attached to that as well. I've had also about 20 years of raising money outside of the public sphere, in private fundraising and in other areas. But basically, my sort of idea here is to sort of see how we as a community can interact in those 3 different spheres. So you have the private, the public, and I guess the third one was just the commercial. And it's basically, how do the 3 interact, and how can we make the best experience for our people in the community and for the kids that are here.
Nice. Thank you so much. I'll lead off. I actually remember the antenna at the ball field. That was my very first meeting on the Planning and Transportation Commission. So that was an interesting one. You mentioned off-leash opportunities. So I'm assuming off-leash dogs. Tell me about that, because I mean, compared to some other communities, they're pretty lacking in Palo Alto. And what opportunities do you see? And then furthermore, there's legitimate opposition to that in terms of preserving the environment and making sure that the dogs don't hurt animals or plants. So how would you approach that?
So generally, the way I would deal with that is you're going to have buy-in, I think, from basically you have to have enforcement. I think that one of the key problems right now is that enforcement is lacking. I have a dog, and I take the dog off leash, and I take her to Hoover, and I take her to Piers, and I basically what I've seen is, as long as you have good people who are both good citizens and have good dog citizens, you're going to have a pretty good experience overall. I think the biggest problem is when obviously you're going to have a few bad apples on in either dogs or people, and I think that part of the problem can be there. But the enforcement issue really is important. I think you should listen to the community and see what the community wants and be willing to compromise. I mean, the fact is that there's time and places where the dogs shouldn't be. Just a fact, right? If that's the case, then you compromise and you set up a situation in which they have times that they can have off-leash dogs, and you have times when they can't be. I know that one of the things about my dog, when I've taken her out during this whole lockdown thing, she is ecstatic to be out at the park, which is great. But we have to make it so that there is a balance between the 2.
Nice. Thank you so much. I want to turn it over to my colleagues. Please just jump in or raise your hands if you have questions.
I think you're on mute. Sorry.
Liz, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, unmuted twice. Curtis, do you have a favorite park? And if so, what is it?
So I think, I think my favorite park would have to be Hoover. I mean, I think Hoover is if you go there, and I wish I could share my photos with you, but I actually saw that when I went there with my dog, I took her to the dog run. And meanwhile, I looked out, and there was a birthday party with somebody had dressed up as a pink unicorn, which I thought was kind of fun. And I wasn't sure if I was seeing it, so I took a picture to prove that I had seen it. And then it also has a baseball field there, and it has, so you have kind of you have the family arrangement there. You have the barbecue pit, the barbecue there. I don't know if you're a barbecue, but you have the picnic tables. And there are always parties going on there, and there's always baseball. there's really something for everyone. And there are the barbecues there. And I remember that we would have barbecues for the baseball games, and then we would just go over and play baseball. It's a great park.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Cormack.
Yeah, I think it got even better once we added the bathrooms, and I always loved sort of the dry creek bed. That was always cool. Okay, Mr. Smolar, thank you so much for applying. I have two questions for you, which you probably already heard by now. And the first is, what are two words that people who have worked with you would use to describe you and how you do your work? And it can be in your Little League work or your professional work or another situation.
I think the first would be collegial, and the second would be, well, it's two words, problem solver. So, I mean, I think, there's a lot of different ways to say it, maybe negotiator. That's really what I do for a living. My job is to take people who are fundamentally at odds and find a resolution. That's what I do. And I do it in a nice way, even when there's not a nice thing going on. There's a lot of nice things that don't happen that you basically have to deal with. In terms of the first part, I've been told that I'm great to work with and that people really enjoy working with me, and that I get along with everyone, even if I don't agree with them. They understand that they understand I don't agree with them. I say, I get your point. I understand where you're coming from, but I just don't get it. Or I just can't agree with it because that's, A, my job, and B, not, where I am. So, I mean, I think basically that would be it.
Okay, great. And then do you have any thoughts on how to fund our ambitious Parks Master Plan?
Well, I mean, I think you have to have sponsors. I think you have to have buy-in from the community. I think you have to have basically, as I mentioned earlier, I would say the three pillars where you would be looking to, private individuals, you'd be looking towards the public, the public resources you have, and you'd be looking towards the commercial resources you have. In Little League, we had all of those. We had local small businesses that would sponsor the teams, and we would then they would then have the different teams, like they had was Cal Electric, and all the different names you can think of. What was All Pros? I mean, you have all the different small businesses in the community. I mean, Little League was a tremendous education for me on kind of how all of these things can work together. And you have to go out and you have to knock on doors and you have to make phone calls and you have to say, hey, I'm okay asking you for money because this is a good thing that we're doing. So I think you go and you do basically, you have to get buy-in from the community and buy-in from the commercial groups. I think everyone can benefit when you work with with the businesses as sponsors.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
So Curtis, I also, well, first, thank you again for applying. I also was on the Plan Commission with Adrian at the time of the cell tower Little League. So if you were to kind of look back on that, right, how do you think, what could we have done that maybe would have made the situation better? Like if you were to kind of have your ideal, your magic wand, right, and you were to look back on that situation and think about how it went down, and if you could do it again in the way that you think is best, how would you do it?
So I think that I think that might be a little bit a bespoke that situation, because of the fact that you had not only you had Verizon, I think it was, or Sprint, and you had Little League, and then you had the fact that they're actually a next door neighbor actually started a nonprofit to oppose the whole thing. I don't know if you remember this.
I do remember.
And I was involved in that. I think part of the way to make it a better situation was with better communication, earlier planning. I think that we learned later on when we were thinking about doing, I don't know what stage it's at right now, but when the Little League was thinking about making changes again, everybody talked earlier about sort of getting out in front of it and not waiting for the problems to come to us. So we planned having conversations with the community. We talked about having having sessions, sort of explaining what's going to happen, what they can expect, what it is that can, it really is going to be going on. I think, clearly you're going to have outliers in the sense that you're going to have some people who, in some situations that you can't anticipate. Like, I think the nonprofit was a little bit, outside what people were thinking was going to happen, and which ended up to a lot of lawyers getting paid. But I think it was, I think having everybody have buy-in from the beginning is a better, is a better process.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Smoller. We're at time, but I want to give you just kind of 30 seconds to wrap up. And also on behalf of the council, thank you so much for your interest in your application.
And thank you very much. What I want to say is just, how much I would love to, work with the city and work for the city and the people of Palo Alto. I think we live in a wonderful place. I think that we live in a place, in a city that we should be proud of. And I think we live in a place that has beautiful parks, and that should be encouraged. And I look forward to the opportunity to not only, work for and with the city, but to be able to maybe, go out and see if I can help by raising money and helping with the community and helping push forward this great vision that the city has. So thank you so much.
Thank you again, and here. Thank you, Mr. Smolar. I believe our next applicant is Osma Thompson.
Correct, and she is applying for the ARB. And I'm going to promote you to panelist, Osma, and if you can turn on your video and audio, the interview will commence.
Hey.
Hello, welcome, Vice Chair Thompson. So first of all, thank you very much for your service on the ARB, and thank you for reapplying. We truly appreciate your interest in continuing your service. Want to give you a minute or two to tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're reapplying, maybe a bit of what you've done and what you're happy with on the ARB. And then I'll turn it over to my colleagues on the council for some questions.
Great. Well, hi, my name is Osma Thompson. I served my first term at the ARB in starting January 2018. And it's been a good time. I've learned a lot about the ARB and how it works with the city, and then also how the ARB can really make a difference, I think, in improving projects that come to Palo Alto and end up getting built in Palo Alto. And I think it's so critical. And I really appreciate that the role the ARB has played over the time to date, and then also the time that I've been on there. And actually those last 2 years, I became a licensed architect in the state of California. And I built my experience in the architecture field. So now I have 7 years of experience outside of school and 10 years in the state of California, which is pretty cool. And my experience in the architecture field has been sort of twofold. One part of it is really on transportation. I've been working on the LAX People Mover, making LA more transit friendly, access to the airport. And another facet is multifamily housing. I've been working on a master planning project in San Francisco that is, has a goal to have density, affordable housing, equity, environmental sustainability. All of these things are really, really important to me, and a lot of the reason why I became an architect. And these are things I'm really passionate about. So my goal to continue on to the ARB would just to continue to assist the city of Palo Alto in sort of how it grows architecturally, character, as it evolves and grows. I'm hoping to sort of help it go there in a sustainable and beautiful way. So that's all I got for you.
Wonderful, thank you. Councilmember Niss.
Oh, you're on mute.
Liz, you're on mute.
It says you would like to see the ARB focus on the architecture a little more than on the politics. Would you say something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to elaborate on that. So, a lot of projects that end up coming to us have a lot of, a lot of political background to them. There's agendas, either on the applicant side, or there's a lot of agendas, different stakeholders in the community have agendas on that sometimes have nothing to do with what the building actually looks like at the end of the day. And my understanding is that the Architecture Review Board is there to provide advice and assistance on the aesthetics of projects that come in front of us. And sometimes I feel like being on the ARB, I've noticed that there's pressures either to approve a project, whether it's good looking or not, or whether it can be a successful project the way it's currently designed, just because of the political agenda behind pushing that through.
Thank you. That's a good answer.
Is that explicit?
Yes, we heard you. Believe me.
Getting it back on us. I'm just joking.
I mean, it's not like, and it's something I definitely struggle with as well. You know, I can give an example. There's an affordable housing project that we approved on El Camino and Page Mill that, you know, probably could have used another round with the ARB to really get to where I think it could have gone. And I think because it's affordable housing and we all want affordable housing, Palo Alto really needs affordable housing, we pushed it through, I think, a little prematurely. So that's an example I would give for that.
Nice, thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate that critique, really do. Councilmember Cormack.
Ms. Thompson, hello. Thank you so much for reapplying. What are 2 words that people who have worked with you would use to describe you and how you do your work? It can be on the ARB and your architectural work and your volunteer mentorship work and your faith-based organization. Any of those?
2 words. All I get is 2 words, huh?
Well, somebody used a compound word earlier, so it's a little flexible.
I've heard detail-oriented before, which I'm going to keep as a compound word.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'm very detail-oriented, and I can be very persistent. So if something is not done yet, I will be very annoying to the person that needs to help me get it done so that we can get it done.
That's great. That's very helpful. And then I noticed in your answer number 4, both of the examples that you provided had lots and lots of natural wood. So I was like, yeah, it's interesting. I can see, you know, your preferences there. And then you mentioned that there have been projects that have been improved by coming through the ARB. Can you give us an example of a project that is improved?
Yeah. Let's see. I think there was a project, the funeral home that was on Arrastradero, that came through twice. And the first time around it came, it was close, but it wasn't there. And we gave some feedback. And the second round was just like, it was a slam dunk. I thought it was looking really great. And that isn't the only time. There's actually so many projects, like even the most recent Castellea project that we sent through, that came through 3 rounds. And the feedback that they heard from us is going to make such a difference. Like just from the beginning to what recently got approved, it's such a difference. It's such a better building than what it used to be.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Tanaka.
Well, first of all, thank you for your service and thank you for being willing to serve again. What do you think are things that the city council could do that would help the ARB be more effective than it is today?
What are things the city council could do? Maybe some of it is a bit of taking the politics out of project. I know that's your job and that should be good. I think that separation would be a lot nicer. I feel like ARB members sometimes find themselves in a tricky position, especially when confronted with a controversial project, you know, whether they should approve it or not based off of the politics of it or not. And if there could be that separation, I feel like that hard decision is really your guys's on your guys's plate. And for us, I think it's really about the aesthetics and it's about, does it work in the environment and the way that it's designed. And how we could do that, you know, could be something that we can work on. I'm sure there's a lot of ways we could work on that to achieve that goal.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. We have just about a minute left, and I wanted to leave it to you for a wrap up. Any final thoughts and ideas?
Sure. Well, in closing, I'd really like to thank you guys for just sitting here and getting to know me a little bit better. And I really want to thank you guys also for making architecture a priority. Design excellence it's attainable. Like it's something that I think people look at as if it's a long shot, but it's not. And, we're living in a world now where the design of architecture it's really like getting heavily influenced by cost. And so we'll see a lot of things, where cost is a big influence in the design. And I'm a firm believer that I think aesthetics can happen no matter the price tag. And so I really appreciate you guys making architecture a priority. And I really appreciate the belief that it is up to the community to ensure that the things that we build here that are going to be here for decades are beautiful and enrich the community for years to come.
Bravo. Thank you so much. Again, thank you for your service. Thank you for reapplying, and hope you have a wonderful night. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, let's please go to our next applicant, Grace Lee, for the ARB and another incumbent.
Yes, so Grace, I am going to promote you to panelist. If you can turn on your video and audio, the interview will commence.
Oh, hello there.
Hello. Hi, Ms. Lee. Thank you for your service on the ARB. Thank you for reapplying. I'm Adrian. These are my colleagues on the council. Sorry, not all of us could make it tonight. But really, we are super appreciative that you've reapplied for the Architecture Review Board. Wanted to give you just a moment or two to talk a little bit about yourself, some of your experiences on the ARB, and maybe why you're reapplying. And then I'll turn it over to my colleagues for some questions, and be sure to leave you a minute or two at the end to wrap up. Sound good?
Sounds good. I'm happy to do it. And I guess I would like to start with just looking back a few thank yous. It's been a very memorable year, 2020, and I guess one of the reasons why I am hopeful to return to the board for this next term is that I believe in the process. I think that the city really needs these boards as well as commissions, and frankly, the council has been very nimble, and it's been very encouraging to see just how much you as a body do and oversee. I don't think that the ARB works alone in entitlement and discretionary review. It's a joint effort, and I'm very appreciative of city staff that has been just adapted so quickly to all of the online application processes and working with applicants and our boards and your body together. And I'm kind of an old timer. I joined the ARB in 2005, and really terrific experience. And here we are, 2020, moving to 2021. And I just want to say that the test of time really, it maturity and time and layers of change. You see this in the environment in Palo Alto, and I see myself having a new set of eyes also after 30 years. And briefly, I did come here as a student and then stayed in the area, went across the bay and in San Francisco to work professionally as in design and teaching. And then after another 15 years, moved to Palo Alto to start a family. And here we are, 15 years now in Palo Alto, and seeing it from kind of all the evolution that has occurred in a 30-year period. And I also am just grateful that last year I met with some of you and was invited back to complete a term for an ARB member. And I do have to say that I'm very encouraged by the 4 colleagues that I've worked with this past year in terms of our diversity of views, but also that the ARB is a forum. It is a place where we listen. It is a place where we discuss. And to go back to it, I believe in this process. So that's in a nutshell.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Councilmember Ness.
And so thank you again for applying. We have heard that perhaps the ARB may be influenced too much by politics. What do you think?
That's an interesting observation, and perhaps in this day and age, particularly at the juncture we are at right now, I believe politics and the layers of kind of interrelationships that occur in terms of public dialogue and public perception, but also priorities. I mean, I believe that there are some regional and some city and some national priorities that come to play in these forums that we have. So when we say politics, and I guess for me, I'm not concerned about how politics influences our discussions. I I'm more concerned if we're not prepared to actually engage in a process that is fair. One of the things that I see at the ARB, and I perhaps as a younger person or someone who just moved to Palo Alto, I might not I would see it differently or would call it differently. But I believe that, well, the city is set up where there's a council and that council has priorities and that's discussed. And one of the things I was encouraged this past year is to see that you all were discussing things that were really important, like housing and sustainability and mobility, safety for our community. And there's multiple bodies that are really assigned by council to discuss what their expertise may be. And for the architectural review board, I don't know if you know the current board, there's actually quite a diversity in terms of experiences, professional experiences. I know the board requirement is only 3 members, but we have members who've, worked on different typologies of buildings. And, my background is urban planning and consulting with cities and affordable housing and working with nonprofits and also some bread and butter commercial and mixed use projects. But we all have these set of experiences and we come together and that discussion takes place. So yes, politics does come into discussion, but I guess I wouldn't call it politics when it comes to design. I think that design is very much problem solving for a specific program in a specific context, and there's many different challenges that occur in that equation. So politics, I guess I don't think of architecture as politics. I'm sorry, Council Member Nis, that's probably a very long response, and maybe not what you're looking
Thank
for.
you.
But I'm
Thank
just
you
speaking
for that.
honestly.
Very thoughtful.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Mayor Fine and Ms. Lee. Good evening. Thank you so much for reapplying. My first question is, what are 2 words that people would use to describe you, people who have worked with you in your professional, personal, volunteer life? How would other people describe who you are and the kind of work you do?
Well, I've even as a design professional, I've spent a lot of time in classrooms, and I guess I do see that I have been described as the good student. I do my homework. I'm on time, if not early, and I've read things several times, and so maybe something like accountable or responsible. I mean, in the architectural world, we have these promotions, and we, as an older person now in the field, it's more about knowing your team and what they do well and just making sure, and then if they can do more, you hand it over. So I guess the other piece it's not really an adjective, but maybe someone who listens. I tend to think of myself, and I've heard from others that I'm good on the front end in terms of needs-based problem solving and understanding a program and users. And so a lot of times in architecture, that's the first thing, right? Is who are the stakeholders, who are the users, who's going to be affected by this, and that listening period. And this goes back probably to my Berkeley days of how I was taught how to approach design problems.
Thank you. And then just briefly, are there any differences you see separate from, your own sort of changing perspective, which you mentioned briefly, between your first time on the ARB and this time? Anything you've observed that's different?
In terms of how the ARB works, or processes applications, or maybe
Up to you. Anything. I mean, like the kinds of things you're seeing, or the quantity, or are there any things that stand out in terms of your prior experience and your current experience?
Yes. Okay. So did begin at ARB in 2005. I checked in with city clerk just to remember the years, and it was through 2011, with the maternity leave in between. So that was a lot of projects. And so, I did sit with a group, and at the time there was a lot of building happening. So, ARB meetings, not like your meetings probably go a lot longer than ours, but some of them I remember would go through lunch. And that's when our blood sugar goes down, but we would be seeing sometimes three major projects, which, now that's something that we don't normally see. We actually see maybe one major project, and then when I started in December, it was the slow. However, the meetings are still going very long. And so it's kind of an interesting situation where less volume, however, there's just as many layers, and the discussion is very rich and can go on for a long time. So that's interesting how that would occur, don't you think? I mean, some of the projects I saw between 2005 and 2011 were very large projects with 3 hearings and those fold out drawings and a lot of opinions. And those were long meetings. And today, just in this past year, we might have just one project, but the public, I'm just listening to the community, is an hour and a half, or an hour. They're lengthy, and so I guess you could look at that as a positive in a way, that we would spend that much time, and the discussion is rich.
Thank you so much. And I concur on the blood sugar dipping. I'm always the first one to ask the mayor for our dinner break during our 7-hour meetings.
I really feel for you all, because it's in the evening, which is super hard. So kudos to all of you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee.
Thanks, Councilmember Cormack. So we're at time, but I see a hand from Councilmember Tanaka if you have a brief question, and then Ms. Lee, if you want to wrap us up.
Yeah, it's brief. First of all, thank you for your service and thank you for reapplying. So one of the things we've heard from applicants is, the infamous Palo Alto process. What do you think we could do that would help, still make sure that we have thorough reviews, but that, this may be a bit more streamlined than it is today. Any ideas or suggestions?
Sure. And so the question, just to be clear, is what can the council do to kind of streamline the process?
I guess I would say the city in general, right?
Yes.
I'll say the city in general.
The city in general. So, I know this is a basic, but I do feel it for every board and every group of people who are starting anew together. There are a set of best practices that seasoned board members, or the chair of a board, or the chair of a commission, or the mayor might be able to impart to a new member to prepare them in a way that provides for harmonious but efficient meetings. And so oftentimes when we jump in, we forget those best practices. So we need those reminders. We ourselves are adults. However, sometimes in meetings, it spins, right? Because there's so much knowledge in the room and everybody has the right intention, but we go off topic, or it becomes something that maybe one member is interested in pursuing along that line and the other. So there does need to be, and I don't know, because the training is always very good with the city and and with the chair of the board that I've been a part of. But there does have to be maybe, and I don't like manuals, but is there a way that we as board members could prepare others, and also some kind of protocols to make sure that those best practices are applied? I feel like training, oftentimes when I work with some of these large institutions, they have these repeat trainings, which nobody likes, but at the same time, it's a great reminder in terms of how to run smoothly and how we all agreed to do it this way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So Ms. Lee, thank you for your many years of service to Palo Alto. Thank you for reapplying to this, to the Architectural Review Board. We really appreciate it, and wish you all the best.
Excellent. I really appreciate it. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
So just to my colleagues, I know we have a break from 5:50 to 6, but I'm going to suggest we just power through. Is that okay? We got 2 more. All right. And it's right on time anyways. So let's please go to Amanda Brown, and this is for a Parks and Recreation Commission appointment.
Yes. So Amanda, I have promoted you to a panelist. If you could turn on your video. Oh, there you go. Great.
Hi, Ms. Brown. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good, thanks so much. So first of all, thank you so much for applying to the Parks and Recreation Commission. We really appreciate your interest. I want to give you a minute or two to tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in the commission and Parks and Recreation in Palo Alto. Then I'll turn it over to my colleagues for a few questions, and we'll leave you a minute or two to wrap up. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Great. The floor is yours.
All right. So my name is Amanda Brown. You can call me Mandy. Either one works. I want to begin by thanking you for your consideration. I'm a native Palo Alton, so born and raised. So I've known the parks as a user from a young age, living right across the street from Rinconada Park. I grew up after leaving Palo Alto. I spent some time on the East Coast, which makes you really appreciate outdoor space and parks in general, especially in Palo Alto. For the past 3 years, I've been working for a management consulting firm specializing in local governments, and I've worked with local governments throughout the state. And I've had the privilege to work with city staff, elected officials, commissioners on a variety of different projects, including strategic planning, financial forecasting, and other special projects. I absolutely love local government and Palo Alto. There's a map of Palo Alto about 10 feet that way hanging on my living room wall. My bookshelves are filled with history of Palo Alto books. And the Parks and Recreation really speaks to me. My grandparents were very involved in open space and park space. And again, being a kid growing up in Palo Alto, a dog owner, an aunt, you really get familiar with the parks. And I think that I can bring a lot of value coming at it with my experience working in local government.
Nice. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. You mentioned you're a dog owner. I am too. And my little beast is sitting right here next to me, barking her head off. A question on that, and I've asked a few others this, like, there are many Palo Altons who are asking for more dog parks, off-leash access, things like that. But then there's some who are understandably worried about environmental degradation, noise, just like that. Any thoughts on how you would negotiate this kind of conflict?
Well, I think that there's a lot of data out there. I mean, in terms of dog licenses out there and just community engagement, where you can look at that, both quantitative data and qualitative data, to figure out where is the need, where is the demand, and how much of the demand is there. I know my dog, we go to Pierce Park and he has no interest in the other dogs. He just wants to walk around and not look at any other dogs or people. And so I think that there's a lot of available information already out there that we could use to drive decision making. And maybe it seems like the loudest voices are calling for certain things, but really taking it with a grain of salt and waiting till more data comes in. I'm a very data-driven person, so you'll see that in a lot of my answers.
Nice, thank you. I really appreciate that, applying even a quantitative approach to dog parks and dog issues in Palo Alto. Awesome. Want to turn it over to my colleagues. Please feel free to jump in or just hit your hands. Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you so much, Mayor Fine. When I was gone, it's because my dog is coming in and out. Fortunately, she's barking at the other end of the house. You may not be able to hear her. Okay, Ms. Brown, thank you so much for applying. It's very nice to meet you. What are 2 words that people who have worked with you would use to describe you? And it could be in your professional life or your personal or volunteer life. What are 2 words that they would use to describe you and the way you do your work?
Analytical, first and foremost. That drives absolutely everything from what piece of furniture I'm going to buy to how I plan out a work plan for a project that I'm using at work. I really think that data-driven decision-making is the future, and it is the smart way to make choices. And we're fortunate in Palo Alto that we have a lot of data. The city of Palo Alto is esteemed for how much it collects data, and even the data you think is not very significant is out there and it can be useful. I did my thesis on the public comments that are on Palo Alto Online, and I synthesized over 1,000 comments trying to get different inputs, because I think that there is a lot of good information. Palo Alto has a lot of assets. We have a lot of good content out there. And so analytical is certainly first and foremost how people would describe me. And the other one, sort of the other side of the coin, is empathetic. I don't believe that there's one right answer. I believe in listening to all viewpoints and considering the impacts. I think that's the sort of urban planner in me, and really sort of looking at, all right, well, this might benefit this group, but how even if it's a smaller impact on another group, it may really impact them in a larger way from their perception. And so I'm slower to make decisions because I do really want to hear and listen to everybody and understand their viewpoints. So analytical and empathetic are the two words that I would use.
Thank you. And then just briefly, do you have any thoughts on how we might go about funding our amazing and ambitious Parks Master Plan?
Sure. When we do any sort of planning projects, we'll do something like an environmental scan, analyzing what assets are out there, what stakeholders, doing a stakeholder analysis, capacity building. I think that Palo Alto is blessed with a lot of great stakeholders and assets. And also, nothing in local government is proprietary. Everybody's game to share information. So reaching out to other cities in terms of what things have worked for them. I know that there are some recreation departments in the Bay Area that are fully funded from the private sector. And so being able to look at what tools they're using and what works, and also just being able to tell the story. Again, sort of going back to my roots in urban planning, EIRs always have the no project alternative. What's the cost of not doing a Parks Master Plan? And being able to communicate that succinctly and widely to the stakeholders is going to be critical for that.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
Thank you for applying. I love the background about how you work with other cities. So how would you compare and contrast how our city manages and funds our parks versus other cities that you've seen or worked with?
Parks is pretty unique across the board. I mean, oftentimes we'll do peer surveys looking at like cities, but Parks is a unique beast in that some cities have aquatics, which can be a huge chunk of their budget or in terms of their operations. And if another city doesn't have aquatics, it's really not comparable. Some parks and recreation departments encompass maintenance, parks maintenance, another huge bucket that is not comparable. So it's really difficult to compare apples to apples, and which means that you need to sort of feather out those differences in order to really compare. What's been more useful in terms of looking for other cities as a guide is looking at them almost like case studies. What's worked and why did it work? What were the sort of factors that went into that decision or into that challenge that made it successful? And using those as sort of lessons learned, but not doing a one-for-one sort of comparison. I do think that Palo Alto does have a lot of assets, and I mean that in two ways. One, they have a lot going on, which can be expensive and challenging and all that goes along with that. But they also do a really good job delivering their services, and the community notices, and they're praised for that. People move here for their parks, and they stay here for their parks, their children and dogs. And so I think Palo Alto does a stellar job, especially given all the things that they have going on, and I'd love to be part of it.
Thank you so much. Just one last question and then give you a minute or so to wrap up. What are your feelings on events in Palo Alto? And I know it's all weird right now because of COVID, but do we do a good enough job of, hosting, communicating, and doing events for various groups, whether it's children, seniors, young adults? Like, is Palo Alto doing well? Or other cities doing things we should look at?
I think that Palo Alto does a good job of providing a widespread. The tough thing about Palo Alto is it has such a diverse population of people that come to these events. It's not just Palo Altans, it's people from all area. It really is a Bay Area city. And the other tough thing is, even though it's not a big city, it sort of functions like a big city, in that you're not only competing with what other cities have going on 4th of July, you're competing with whatever other blockbuster movie comes out, whatever private event is being held. You're really competing across the board. I think that what makes Palo Alto unique, like the chili cook-off, like that's a really unique thing that Palo Alto does, and they've really owned that. I think they do a great job at that. I think partnering with the Chamber of Commerce for the Arts Festival downtown is a great example of bringing in external partners to really make a special event. So I don't think that there's any sort of gaps, but Palo Alto is always changing, and you should always be listening to your residents and evolving with the needs that come with the changing demographics.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Want to leave you just a minute or so to wrap up. Any final thoughts?
I just want to add that I am, like I said, super passionate about Palo Alto and about serving my community, and I just really appreciate the time. I know you have a lot of great candidates to consider, but it's a real honor even being given this opportunity. So thank you very much.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for applying. We appreciate that as well. Thank you so much. Nice to see you tonight. I believe our last applicant is Brent Yamashita, also for the Parks and Recreation Commission.
Right, yes, and Brent, I have promoted you to panelist. If you could turn on your video and audio, the interview will commence.
Okay, I think I'm on.
Great. Mr. Yamashita, nice to see you again. Thank you for reapplying to the Parks and Recreation Commission. We truly appreciate that. Kind of the same format. We just want to invite you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your interest in the commission, why you'd like to serve, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues for some questions and leave you a minute or so for wrap up. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Go for it.
Yeah, so my family and I have lived in Palo Alto for 17 years. We're in Midtown. I'm married with 2 kids. Oldest just graduated from Palo 6 months ago. The youngest is a junior. And we have a dog, like many of you I've heard tonight. I'm a lawyer at a firm in Palo Alto, and I love our city. I love Palo Alto. It's our home. I love the people we have. I think the city government does a great job. And I like our parks and rec, the recreation programs and the parks and open spaces that we have. So I wouldn't come into this with any agenda to instigate huge change. I mostly would want to serve our community and you guys, the council, and keep what we have, which I think is already very good.
Nice. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. I'll kick it off with one question. What do you think is like the #1 complaint or issue you hear about parks, recreation, and kind of outdoor space in Palo Alto from residents around here?
I think just from talking to friends and so forth, it's probably restrooms. Any parent who's had a little kid who needs to find a restroom immediately, I think that's a hard one for any parent to deal with. So I remember when my kids were younger and I helped coach Little League and we would, have practice at parks, there often wasn't a bathroom. So, and I know that's part of the master plan. And, but I think in terms of the complaint I hear the most, it's probably that. For the parks that do have bathrooms, I think, nobody's fond of using a park restroom, but I think our city does a good job. I mean, compared to other cities and other just public places I've been, we have good facilities. So I think, the way to improve that would just to build more bathrooms in parks that don't have them, as we can.
Nice answer. Thank you. Councilmember Cormack.
So I think then I'll ask my second question first, which is, do you have any thoughts on how we might fund our ambitious parks master plan for all of these restrooms in all of these parks that don't have them?
Sure. Yeah, as a citizen, I realize we have a budget deficit and sales tax, hotel tax is down. So I think there's really 2 options. One, either some of that's going to have to wait because, we're not going to have money for everything this coming year or maybe the year after. And if I were on the commission, I would recognize that and not just be pushing for, hey, Parks and Rec have to be fully funded. I would understand that the city has many things that require funding and would try to keep perspective on that. The second thing is, I think, which I've already heard from all the candidates tonight that I've listened in on, if we have a deficit as a city, then the money obviously has to come from elsewhere. So private donations, whether it's individuals or businesses, and for better or for worse, there's a lot of wealth in Palo Alto, and people are very generous with that. And so if we tap into the right sources, there's a lot of kind-hearted, civic-minded people here and businesses, and you might be able to fund it that way.
Great, thank you. And then since you've been listening, I can probably skip the question, but what are 2 words that people who have worked with you would use to describe how you do your work?
So law firms can often be contentious or stressful, but I'm happy that a few of my colleagues have called me kind. A younger attorney who I was a mentor to told me at some point, "Oh, you're like a nice uncle that I can always go to." And I had never thought of myself that way, but I was happy that he viewed me that way, and hopefully I do, behave that way at work. I think another quality might be dedicated. I care about my clients, whether they're big or small, and my coworkers, and I don't mind working late, working weekends, not getting as much sleep as I need or should get, if it means we have to do something to help our client tonight. So I would hopefully bring those same qualities to this, position. I would hope that the other commissioners would find that I am kind to work with, and that the community would be okay dealing with me and find that I'm listening to their concerns. And I would be dedicated. I have always wanted to get more involved, but I try not to overextend myself. And so now that my kids are older, I do feel like I have time to dedicate myself to this role and that I could contribute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yamashita.
Thank you, sir. I want to turn it over to my colleague, Councilmember Tanaka.
Thank you for applying. I thought you had an interesting comment about how if there's less budget, we have to kind of perhaps put off some things versus trying to do it all at once. How do you prioritize? Because in general, it's hard to say no to people, right? I mean, generally, it's easy to say yes to everything, and during the flush times, you could do that, right? But right now, it's definitely tough times, right? And so, how do you prioritize what happens fairly? When before we didn't necessarily have to do that as quite as stringently as we have to do that now. So what would your process be to figure out how do we allocate the scarce resources we have across the different things that we want to do on the Parks and Rec?
Yeah, honestly, I think it is a situation where at the end of the day, someone's going to be unhappy, right? Some group or some part of the community will be unhappy because their project didn't get funded, or something got cut. I think in that kind of situation, what matters is the process, that the stakeholders feel like, oh, people are listening. And even though I didn't get the project I care about got cut or wasn't funded, at least they seem to be listening to what I had to say and seem to have an open mind. And I think that goes a long way. And I think that's part of the Palo Alto ethos, that people are passionate, but we also listen to each other. And I think if we all have that mindset, at least people feel like they've been heard, even if they don't get what they want in the end.
Thank you. Just one last question, and then want to leave some time for you to wrap up. So I think one of the silver linings of this really tough year has been the opening of our streets, Cal Ave and University, to restaurants, businesses, pedestrians, bikes, etc. And as I went down University today, it struck me like, hey, this is recreation, right? People are out here walking their dog, strolling the street, whatever. And the program is likely to continue through part of next year. Do you think the Parks and Rec Commission has a role in that? And if so, like, what would you imagine? What do you think we could be doing better with regards to some of these street openings or closures, however you look at them?
Yeah, it does have a nice feel to it. It feels a little more like we're not a huge city, but it feels a little more like a small town where people, can kind of relax and see each other and run into friends and so forth. So I've liked that part of it too during this awful period of shutdown and pandemic. In terms of whether the Parks and Rec Committee or Commission has a role in that, I'm not sure. To be honest, I wouldn't think it would fall within their purview. I think one important, maybe a different commission would be the one that comes to mind immediately, which is parking. That I love going to California University as well, but in the past, the big headache is parking. And so the thing that would keep people from continuing to go there and hanging out and going to restaurants and walking along University would be if parking got worse. But so I think the parking facilities that have been built in the past 7 years, and the one in downtown and the one that's coming up in California, will really help in that regard.
Nice. Thank you so much. Mr. Yamashita, we're about at time, so just want to leave you some last thoughts.
Yeah, I think the qualities that I would bring to the table that hopefully would be helpful would be, I think the process of what the commission does is something that I can do very naturally. So in terms of listening to people, sitting in long meetings and not, losing focus, and getting along with colleagues, and reading and writing a lot of stuff. I do all of that very well. In terms of substance, I can't say I'm a Parks and Rec expert or an ecologist or anything like that. But you guys can know that I love our parks and recreation programs, and I have taken things like tap dancing and kite building in the past through the city programs. So hopefully you would see that my heart is in the place you would want your commissioners to be in. And, and I could I'd hopefully bring my kind and dedicated qualities to the commission and help the council and the city.
Nice. Thank you so much. We truly appreciate you spending the time with us tonight and are really appreciative for your interest in the commission. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Great. Thank you. Okay. I believe that concludes item number 1, our interviews. And so with that, we move on to the final item of the night, oral communications, where members of the public may speak to any item which is not on the council's agenda for the night. So if you'd like to speak in oral communications, please raise your hand or hit *9 on your phone. And if the clerk would help me with anyone who wants to provide a comment.
Yes, of course. As of now, there are no raised hands. Again, if you would like to comment, please press *9 if you are on your phone, or raise your hand on the app. Currently, there are no raised hands from the public.
Thank you so much. Okay, with that, we conclude oral communications. Many thanks to all of the applicants, all of our serving board and commission members. Thanks to everybody for joining tonight, to my colleagues as well. And with that, at 6:23, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Bye.